Today's video, we're going to be looking at the McFarlane Toys Jim Henson's Labyrinth. This is the Color Top's Jareth the Goblin King. Let's grab the tape measure. I do have him on his display stand. There's a reason for that. Jareth stands little shy of 8 inches in height. Sure, okay, we'll get some measurements going with the base. The base also allows Jareth to stand at 8.5 inches, should you wish to have the figure on a stand instead. Yes, unfortunately, Jareth doesn't stand all that great. Taking him off the display stand for a second. One of the problems I have with this particular, I quote unquote, figure is he has a little bit loose in the way of his ankle pivot. I'll get into that in a second, but first things first, he does have the Jim Henson's Labyrinth display base with a somewhat kind of cobblestone brickwork on the top there, cast completely in black plastic, with only really the front deciphering the fact or telling you the fact that it's from the movie Labyrinth. We'll put that to the side. He does come with some other accessories as well, one of which, almost something that rolled away on me, comes with his little crystal ball. Somewhat ironic that he comes with a crystal ball because in the scene, the Masquerade scene, one of my favorite scenes from the movie Labyrinth, the crystal ball doesn't make any sort of appearance. It's assumed that Sarah is inside the crystal ball and shatters it, but he's not actually holding the crystal ball at any point during the Masquerade ball. Despite that, McFarlane Toys felt the need to include it. I'm not knocking the fact that he does come with one because at least, you know, it's nice that Jareth would come with a crystal ball, but you can't really have him holding it. It's somewhat just rests in his palm rather than actually being frictioned or something in which it would feel like a more secure fit. Ultimately, any bit of banging, knocking the figure, the crystal ball would roll away. And it's so small, I hope that not be the case. Well, I'm going to just put that over there and hope it doesn't go too far. Stay there, crystal ball, stay there. The other accessory that he comes with is his Masquerade Mask, which has some really neat looking design elements to it. Almost a gargoyle demon sort of head, and you've got these not cascading, but extended out horns. Again, Jareth the stand here. There we go. I mean, the mask is done really nicely. You have the handle in which he's holding it, and a little skeletal hand attaches that to the mask. All of this is soft rubber. The base or handle itself is a little bit more of a denser plastic, but all this part here is a little softer. It attaches only by this hand here, not obviously the other hand. And it's not the easiest. Let me get this first into his fingers and then we'll talk about it. It's not the easiest to line up everything. I have to kind of keep adjusting a hand, adjusting an elbow, bringing out the shoulder until I hopefully can get it to a point in which the mask is closer to his face. It's not the easiest. And let me just, oops, not drop the mask in the process. It is definitely not easy to get everything lined up so that it looks like he's actually got the mask against his face. A lot of times I end up thinking I got it, and I just look at the side and there's a big glaring gap between his face and the mask. However, the packaging would lead you to believe it's fairly easy to accomplish. That's not necessarily true. There's a close-up look at the package. And by the way, also, one thing that I couldn't show you at the beginning because Jareth was inside was it features the alternate poster of Labyrinth. It's not my favorite poster. This has Sarah running through the labyrinth, and it's inside the crystal ball that Jareth is holding. It lines itself up. I don't know if you can see it or not, but the face, the bottom half of Jareth lines up to the top part of his eye in Labyrinth, which I think is kind of neat. They could have also used the original movie poster, which has kind of like, it's hard to describe it, but it's like Jareth at the top and it kind of cascades down and it's made up of the labyrinth, and then you got Sarah at the bottom. It's one of my favorite movie posters of all time, and it's one that I've actually got in my my den sort of man cave. I think I've actually shown it in one of my, I think my only vlog, walking through my collection, if you guys haven't had a chance to check that out. So let's go ahead and get the mask out of his hand and have a look at Jareth. Now, I would have thought, in my imagination, that if McFarlane was going to approach the Labyrinth, that they would have given him the default Jareth look first and go with Masquerade Jareth later. But ultimately, they went with this Jareth first, which I hope is a precursor to what we may eventually get with later Jareth figures. And because, I mean, really, there's potential to be releasing multiple different Jareths, because he appears differently so often in the movie, that maybe, I hope, this isn't the only Jareth that we're going to be getting. Okay, so let's have a look at this figure. Let's get to the nitty-gritty, because I've really been anxious to get this figure in hand. I keep wanting to call it figure, and technically, to that extent, it is. It does have posability. It's not the statue that one would believe that it is, but we'll talk about that in a second. But let's first have a look at his face, which, for the most part, I think looks like him, but it does seem slightly off. I'm trying to kind of look at it, and, well, we can look at like the package, for example. I feel maybe like the eyes are off. Something is off on this figure that's throwing off overall, making it look like the figure, or look like Jareth here. Of course, he's got his very large poofy hair, long cascading hairs below that. I mean, this is beyond the scope of a mullet. This is like, can't even describe, this is like galactic mullet. He's got his shading right above his eyes, leading themselves into his pointy eyebrows. I think they got a good skin tone, but again, something seems slightly off. From, oh, right there, I think it looks like David Bowie. As we kind of slightly turn it, I feel like maybe right there seems off. But I will say, for giving it an effort and giving us this particular figure, I'm not going to knock it too much. Of course, can't look at it through rose-colored glasses, but I'm just happy that we're getting a Goblin King figure, or statue, if you want to look at it that way. Now, I've recently watched Labyrinth prior to reviewing this guy. And again, the Masquerade Ball is one of my favorite scenes from the Labyrinth. I also really like the scene where Sarah's running through the catacombs of the Labyrinth after Jareth has taken his crystal ball and thrown it, and it creates this kind of spiral thing that's chasing her. I really like, that's one of my favorite scenes as well. But there's a lot of fun scenes in that movie. I would hope everybody watching this review has certainly watched The Labyrinth. If not, shame on you. Now, so going to the source material in which this figure is based from the scene. Well, I think it's got the necessary sculpt cues. I feel like the paint is glaringly off. Looking at the footage again, one can't help but see that Jareth's jacket is not quite this shade of metallic blue. Instead, it's actually closer to being like a purpley blue or like a really dark navy blue. Even like the gemstones, which are sculpted nicely here on the collar and the back portion of the jacket, doesn't have nearly as much the color that it does in the movie. And the movie's got more like a lot more dark blue, a lot more kind of slightly greenish gemstones that cascades themselves across his jacket. So exactly how nitpicky should one get looking at this? I suppose I should be as fair to this figure as I would with any other figure, not considering the fact that I love the property, the movie, so much. He's got some, unfortunately, some paint issues where it just seems like the gold is carried off from the cuffs of his sleeve into the higher sleeve area of his jacket. Because it's so, the colors are so close to one another with the blues, the darker blacks, and the gold, it's almost so easy to overlook the fact that paint gets past the point of the cuff and carries itself into the sleeve instead. But it is there, unfortunately. Blue carries itself down into the gold. It's not the cleanest paint, though from the distance, it would fool you to believe that the paint is done exceptionally well. Love the long train of his jacket. And like even the cuff part here, if I want to be 100% critical, this is kind of closer to more of a silver color in the scene. It's not quite the white that we would have here in the color top. Color comparisons aside, it is a really nice sculpt. Even though the face seems slightly off, the rest of the figure looks quite astonishing. And maybe we might even get ourselves a Sarah in her ballroom gown to maybe accompany Masquerade Jareth on display here. So let's talk about some of the problems I have with a particular figure. I'm not going to really nitpick too much more on the paint. Paint is what it is. It does look good. It's just not 100% screen accurate. The problem with the figure, though, is he does have really loose, or at least for me, he has exceptionally loose ankles. Especially the rocking aspect of it, he's extremely loose. Getting him at packaging, this was flopping around on me. So that's why I said he has a tough time standing. If you have a fairly secure figure, you may not have the problem that I have. As you can see, he falls right over. So getting him on the necessary display stand is probably the crucial way to go for displaying the figure. And because his feet are so kind of loose to start off with, you kind of really have to press down to get him to stand properly on his display stand. And even then, you can see he slightly tips forward. I'm going to angle like the legs forward, kind of slightly more ahead, so he's not going to topple over. But there's very little clearance from the front to the back. The figure basically lines right up to the back of the stand. If they had added just a little bit, just about that much extra base on the back, I wouldn't have any issue where the figure may potentially fall over. Let's look at his posability, because I know it's to some debate when it comes to the color top figures. So his head is a ball joint. So you got some extra motion and movement there. That's good. You got universal joints on the arms. They hinge out. That's good. And the arms rotate all the way around. He does have what almost would convince you to think that these are ratcheted joints. I don't know if you can hear it or not. There's very little in the way of ratcheting happening here. Rotation in the hands. They look as if they are on a ball joint. He has no waist swivel. So really now when we start getting from the waist down is when you start looking at a more staction figure. He has articulation in the legs, but gosh darn it, I just can't even figure out why they would have incorporated it. It looks like the legs only hinge outward, but by the nature of the way that the legs peg in, the feet peg into the base, you can't have the legs that far out anyways. Why would they even bother to put that in there? Coupled with the fact that you can't really do too much moving of the legs anyways, because of the nature of the way that the legs are sunken into the back train, the longer part of his jacket on the back here. He does have a knee bend, but again, what are you really going to do with it? Ankle articulation, okay, I can appreciate if the figure could stand properly, but again, with these very, very loose feet, it seems almost impossible to do so. The color tops, Jareth the Goblin King from the movie Labyrinth, and one of my personal favorite movies of all time, is close to being a good figure. It misses slight marks here and there with the color choice that they went with for the jacket, the face sculpt seeming slightly off, and incorporating accessories that he doesn't do the greatest of jobs of holding, next to a fact also as well that he doesn't stand great. His legs are extremely loose. More importantly, the ankle areas are extremely loose on the figure, so getting him to stand on the base, from time to time, I do notice that the figure wants to kind of slightly topple over or lean slightly to the back. They maybe should have factored that in and made the display base a little bit wider, or at least a little bit deeper, further past the point of where the figure's legs peg in, so the figure wouldn't accidentally fall back. And even like looking at this figure right now in final looks, it seems as if the figure's kind of slightly swaying back, and I hopefully he's not going to topple over. I really wish that he could have held the actual crystal ball a little bit better than what he does. Instead, it just kind of sits in his hand. Any bit of banging, that ball is going to go and it's going to disappear forever. Maybe it's even going to go to the labyrinth and I'll never be able to find it again unless I go into the labyrinth and I solve it myself. All of which adds up to a figure, and I keep saying figure, which again is a debatable topic when it comes to the color tops. Is it a figure? Is it a statue? Is it a little bit of country? Is it a little bit of rock and roll? The world will never know, but there's potential for this particular figure. It could have been a little bit better, but I'm just overall happy that we're getting Labyrinth property figures again. Let's hope we can get ourselves a Sarah and Masquerade Ball, and even more variations of Jareth would be really welcomed here in this collector's collection. Today, nonetheless, we are having a look at the McFarlane toys. This was the Color Tops Labyrinth, Jareth the Goblin King in his Masquerade outfit. If you guys like this video, certainly hit it with a like down below. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe to this channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that little subscribe button. It's just below the video, and you'll never miss a beat when it comes to future videos. As always, guys, thanks for watching as you always do. I'll see you next time.